Welcome back. Chapter 10. So in Chapter 10, we are going to talk about intimacy and marriage. So we got through all that relationship stuff, the hard stuff of finding the relationship, and we found our partner. So now we're going to talk about those relationships and those marriages, because marriages and our lifetime partner is a huge influence on how we see the world and how we adjust to the world and what we do every day, because they've become attached to us and a big part of our world. But marriage is the legal and social sanctioned union of two intimate adults. And traditionally, we see marriage consist of economic dependence, common residence, sexual fidelity, and a shared responsibility for raising children and household duties. So that's traditionally what we view marriage as. Now, again, every relationship's a little bit different, and how they view that marriage may be different as well. Other things. There are other trends, though, that we're seeing with regards to marriages, and things have changed. If we think back circa 200 years ago, marriages looked a lot different than they do today. Some of those trends that we see is an increased acceptance of singlehood, an increased acceptance of cohabitation without marriage, and the reduced desire for permanency, where divorce may become more common and acceptable, that we just no longer want to be in this relationship that we thought we wanted at that time. Also, transitions in gender roles make marriages look a little bit different in many cases, where couples may set their own roles with regarding to, again, 200 years ago, the roles were very traditional or often kind of set in stone, and now they're much more in flex. There's also an increase in voluntary childlessness, so whether they be single or married, people choosing not to go on to have children. There is also a decrease in the nuclear family, meaning that idea of 2.5 kids and a dog. It doesn't always look that way. So families look different than they did before. Doesn't make them right or wrong, good or bad, just that our families look different. And so there's a lot of growth in that area. I'm not saying what you should have for your life, just that there's a lot of different types of families today. When we think about relationships and marriage, we typically think from our own eyes and our perspective as to what we see in the individualistic society that we've grown up in, assuming that is where you grew up, because you could be taking this class from somewhere else. But many cultures still do rely on arranged marriages and over free choice. And while that behavior is declining, it is still the prominent area in many, many different cultures. And even if it's not determined, it's often an influence in their marriage. So, and those marriages do also have a great deal of success. So we're looking at it from our eyes, the way we see marriage, but that's not necessarily how everyone sees it. A few terms to be familiar with: monogamy, which is one spouse at a time. That is the norm for our society. Polygamy, which is more than one spouse at a time, and that is a norm in some societies, just not our society or individualistic, which tends to be United States and European nations. Endogamy, which is the tendency for people to marry within their own social group. So here they tend to seek partners that are of the same race, religion, ethnic background, and social class. So people that are similar to them. Homogamy, which is the tendency to marry those, again, that are of similar characteristics. So as opposed to just being the cultural backgrounds that are the same, I'm also going to seek out somebody who has a similar other characteristics, such as similar in age, similar in attractiveness, and similar in education. And that is most common, that we tend to seek people that are more like us. Certainly not how all families are, but it is the most common that we see today. There are some predictors of marital success. Again, by no means am I writing you a book on how to have a successful marriage. I'm just giving you some things to think about as we see that studies give us some indicators. One of those is family background. We are more likely to divorce if our parents are divorced. The reasoning behind that is it just may be considered a more acceptable solution. So in some cultures or some families, divorce just is not an option. You're going to have to figure out how you make it work. In other families, it may be considered an option, so it may be easier to get to that place of divorce. Just because your parents were divorced does not mean you will be divorced. There's a statistic there to be aware of. Age is another factor. People that tend to marry very young are more likely to be divorced. Again, you may have married at 18, the day you got out of high school, and been married ever after, and that is awesome. It's just statistics to be aware of. The length of the courtship. The longer that you dated, or more likely that you knew the person, the more likely to have marriage success. You've seen that come up in several chapters. Personality. There is no specific trait that says marriages work better if you are happy or outgoing or introverted. There is no specific trait, but we do know that there are two traits that do not do well in marriage in long term. So when we see these traits pop up a lot, they do sometimes hurt the marriage or create a struggle within the marriage, and those are perfectionism, expecting ourselves or our partner to be perfect, and insecurity. And then we addressed that prior as well. If we're constantly insecure, it can just add stress to the relationship. Some of the things that can help us in a relationship is what we had addressed prior. So some of these I am going through pretty quickly because we did talk about them. They're the same things that got us in a good relationship, such as good communication and good conflict resolution skills. If we have that pre-marriage, we're more likely to keep that in the marriage. Something that can also hurt a marriage is a stressful event. So stressful events can bring people closer together as they work through that, but they can create a conflict that the people can't get through. That could be things like unemployment, financial stressors, a chronic stressor, an illness, something like that comes across where the relationship doesn't look the way it did before when I got into it, and I'm just not able to work through that new thing that's entered the relationship. Whether or not what we do see is that sorry, I got distracted. I see what I'm saying. Sorry, I had to look at my notes for a second. I lost track. So with regards to having a stay-at-home parent for our children, there's a lot of people who have a firm belief that you need to have a stay-at-home parent for the children to be well adjusted and to do well in life. Studies do not hold that to be true. It says we need to have good parents that make sure that those needs are met. We do not have an indication that there is less bonding, less attachment, or lower achievement for children of working parents. So that does not hold true. That does not make it right for every family. So every family has to make the personal decision that is right for them. But in general, you should relieve yourself of any guilt if you are a working parent, that your children are not more likely to be attached less or to achieve less. You just need to make sure that their needs are met like anyone else would be doing that. So that's really important. But again, it is a personal choice. By no means am I saying you should or shouldn't work. You should evaluate that for yourselves. But if you're feeling guilt, you should let that go so that you can spend your time focused on your child and your relationship instead of your guilt. Money does make a factor in relationships, not in the sense that money makes us happier, but the lack of money can add a stressor. And so the stressor of not having the funds that we need to do the things that we need to do can create a stressor and can cause a problem for us. The best thing to do is to be able to communicate openly about financial decisions, and then we can work through those conflicts together. So having more money, and we see this with lottery winners or people who come into a windfall of money, it does not make them more happy or less likely to divorce. Just the lack of it can create stress. Number one reason for marriages failing is poor communication and poor conflict resolution skills in the struggle. Again, as we addressed earlier, conflict is inevitable. It's part of a relationship, and it is not a predictor of marital success. If you have conflicts, that's perfectly fine. But what is a predictor is your ability to communicate and work through those problems that happen. There are 4 communication styles that will hurt marriages. One of those is contempt, and that means I'm treating my spouse as they are inferior and they're not as valuable as me. The second one is criticism, which is constantly or negatively evaluating your partner. Defensiveness, which is invalidating or refuting or denying your partner's thoughts or feelings. And the fourth is stonewalling, which is refusing to listen to your partner's complaints. Also, a front runner in there is belligerence, which is the provoking or combative challenges to the partner and their authority or what they do. So those 5, I really like all 5. Those are poison in a relationship. So, if you're having a lot of conflict, maybe you need to look at yourself and look at your partner and go, are we relying on these communication styles? And are those the healthiest for us? And if we are relying on those, can we change it? And if we can't change it on our own, can we get help to change it, wherever that may come from? Because those can be poison to your marriage. As we move forward, we look at divorce, which is the legal dissolution of a marriage. Divorce rates have actually gone down a little bit in most recent years, but they're still relatively high, with about 40 to 45% of all marriages leading to divorce. 3/4 of those people who get divorced will go on to remarry again, an average of 3 to 4 years after their divorce. The divorce rates for second marriages are a little bit higher than first marriages, and they are also more likely to lead to step families or blended families, which will bring their own issues to the table. Gay and homosexual relationships look very similar to heterosexual relationships, as we addressed before, with regards to those elements of a relationship, with the exception of that in some states, people who are in gay relationships are still denied the right to marry. Therefore, some of the aspects of the relationship may look different because the legal process is different for them. Up to 70% of couples live together before marriage, and 35% of people who are never married will go on to have children. So marriage is not the only way that we see partnering happening in relationships. We do see a lot of singlehood and a lot of areas where people choose to remain single and do not want to enter the marriage arena for whatever reason. Last but not least in this chapter, which is very important to address, is intimate partner violence. And again, there's subsets that we would spend a whole lot of time. So by no means am I going to capture this in a paragraph because this is such a detailed area. But 25% of all women and 7% of all men have been assaulted by a partner in their lifetime. That doesn't mean marriage, just means an intimate partner. Anyone can be abused, but statistically, women are abused more than men. That's just the way it rolls out. They are also more likely to be raped, murdered, or seriously hurt, primarily because the person is typically a male versus a female, and they're stronger. They tend to be more aggressive as well, where women tend to slap as aggression, men tend to hit. So there tends to be a more likelihood that they're going to be seriously hurt in aggression incident. Again, very individualized. By no means am I saying male partner abuse is okay by a male or a female, just that statistically women are more likely to be hurt. Intimate partners stats, when we talk about intimate partner violence, those do include dating as well as marriage. So hopefully we've given you some good stuff about marriage and what you can use, or some things to think about. If you're in a marriage, hopefully you can look at those things and say, you know what, I do all those things and we're in a good place. And if you're not, it gives you something to think about and hopefully some good tools to use moving forward. Come on back, chapter 11, we're going to talk about gender and behavior. See you soon.